It's 2 minutes past the hour. I don't want to keep us waiting, so I will get us started. Hi, everyone. Good morning from me. I'm on the East Coast of the US. Good afternoon for the rest of you, or good evening, wherever you are. Um, so first of all, thank you all so much for joining us today for this next conversation in our speaker series, the Arab Foundations Forum Speaker Series, which we launched back in 2023, I think was the first time. And, after October 7th, we pivoted and started focusing a lot of our conversations on obviously Gaza and some other, humanitarian crises that were cropping up, including Lebanon and Sudan. And so we focused a lot of the conversations that we were having around philanthropy, and particularly philanthropy in the Arab region, on some of these more geopolitical issues. And although we're going to continue to do that and continue to offer a space where we can have those conversations, we're also going back to kind of the original intent of the speaker series, which is to have these intimate one-on-one conversations with people who are working across the philanthropy space in the Arab region and beyond the Arab region, just to have discussions that are a little bit more in depth than maybe what you would be used to in a regular, panel-based sort of webinar. And really, for me, I feel like these conversations are inspiring because not only because the people that we're speaking to are so inspirational, but really because they're conversations between friends, right? And that's kind of what I want them to be. I want everyone who's joining us to feel like you're joining in on a conversation between two friends. And so we try to talk about things that maybe you won't necessarily hear in your every, day-to-day, any other sessions that you attend or whatever, just to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the motivations behind why people are doing the work that they're doing, what are some of the challenges that they're facing. And one of the main things about this series is really to try to address and confront some of the issues that are the most pressing in our sector and in our region, and even globally. So this particular conversation that we're having today about localization and the use of digitization um, in localizing philanthropy is very, very timely. First of all, from a regional perspective, obviously, but then also globally, I think it's undeniable, and wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the philanthropy sector is probably experiencing some of the most kind of upending circumstances in recent history. And I, don't just mean from the perspective of the withdrawal of USAID funding and then all other international funding making similar cuts across the board. But really, just if you couple that with some of the polycrises that we're looking at, whether it's climate, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's the political situation in the US or across Europe, it's this very, the zeitgeist is one of kind of a moment of really pivotal change. And so we felt like it would be really important for us to, of course, address the more practical day-to-day impact that this might have, which is something that I think we'll be doing. It's not a one-off conversation that you have. A lot of different organizations across the sector have been having those conversations about how these situations are impacting the sector and impacting people's work individually and collectively, but really also to talk about some of the potential opportunities that might be coming out of this moment that we're all in. And so that's why today's conversation for me is really so interesting and so exciting, because we have with us, first of all, who I'll welcome in a moment, and hand the floor over to him, Mr. Hazem Fahmy, who's the regional director for MENA at CARE, which I just realized now when I was speaking with him a little bit earlier in the introduction, is part of the larger CARE USA, sort of headquarters, but then also oversees several different regional CARE offices around the MENA region. And I'll ask, Hazem to tell us a little bit more about what that means. But really what we wanted to talk with Hazem about is to focus a bit on how are we using digital technology to kind of meet this moment that we're in. Care Care International is really a global leader in the fight against poverty, the fight against social injustice. It's an organization that reaches millions of people, and I think it's about 121 countries, through, or across about 1,500 projects or 1,400 projects. Um, you know, this year alone, CARE, with many of its partners, its local partners, has impacted the lives of approximately 53 million individuals around the world. It has a very strong focus on empowering women, girls. The organization has a commitment to ensuring the dignity and the rights of every person. And they, don't take background or circumstance into regard. So it really is kind of like an organization that across the board focuses on, improving the well-being of humans, irrespective of where they are. And again, I think also, like many other humanitarian organizations, CARE has focused a lot of creating the lasting change that it's trying to create around the world in line with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. They, aim to eradicate poverty. They aim to address gender equality or gender inequality, and that's really a kind of the heart of the efforts that drive their mission. But one of the things that I think we really wanted to delve a little bit deeper with Hazem about is just looking at where we are in the sector today, where the region is in the sector today, and where the region is really in general in terms of development, in terms of philanthropy. What are some of the innovations that CARE is looking to explore, and how are they implementing some of the more innovative models around the work that they're doing? So to delve a little bit deeper into this, I'm going to introduce Hazem, who, like I said, is the regional director for CARE in the Middle East and North Africa. I won't go into the whole bio. I'll ask Hazem to give us a little bit of his own background, because the very first question that I'm going to ask you, Hazem, and good afternoon to you and good morning from me, is really just to say, first of all, you and I have been waiting a very long time to have this conversation. So I'm really, really delighted that we're having this conversation. And I wanted to ask you just kind of like to set this, set the tone for us about the deeper issues that we're going to be discussing through today's episode, is if you can give a little bit more of the personal reason behind the initial inspiration for you to enter this field. Because my understanding is, you have a PhD focused on water resources.
Yes.
And you have a very long kind of, years and years of experience in development work. And I'm always very curious to know what drives people to go from the study of whatever it is that you decide to focus on scholastically, and then how that takes you into, running a regional office for one of the largest humanitarian organizations and development organizations in the world. So just a little bit about that would be great.
Sure. Well, thank you, Naila. Really, really a pleasure to be with you here. I'm really excited about being here. I really thank you for the opportunity. And to be completely frank, I entered the sector by complete coincidence. It just happened one day. A friend was visiting me in my office, and somebody was asking him for a reference for a project manager that happened to be on water resources. And I was in front of him, and he asked me for my CV, and I think it was maybe 72 hours later, I got the job. And it was, funny enough, it was with CARE in Egypt at the time. And I stayed in this. I fell in love with the sector. I fell in love with how can you actually have an impact on the direct impact on people's lives, and how can you be at the same time part of more systematic change, and not beyond the immediate charity that people may think of, that you're actually looking into systems change as well. Which is, if you want to think about what attracted me, my background in water resource planning and management is we do a lot of systems thinking, a lot of modeling, mathematical modeling and otherwise. and just the way you analyze things lends itself very easily to analyzing where the problems of poverty is and how can you actually address solving them. Obviously, it's not as easy as plugging in an equation because there is human lives, there are lots of choices, politics, and other circumstances that come to play. But that's what made me stay beyond that.
Right.
So coincident, like I said.
Right. And I mean, I guess one of the things, like when you're talking about that connection that you're making to looking at systems change in order to address issues like poverty. It's funny because I've just gone back now to do my master's. I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm loving it, but it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a very different experience to go back to school in your 50s than it is when you're in your 20s. But anyway, that's a different story. And one of the things that I've been very kind of interested in is really looking at applying the theoretical behind exactly what you're saying, these formulas that are sort of, intended to explain how we can drive system change to what it actually takes to implement that kind of change. And so around the eradication of poverty, around the connection that you make between your, theoretical interest in water resource management to how that can impact the alleviation of poverty, is a very interesting jump. And so I appreciate making that, that bridge, that connection. And I think, again, to get us into talking a little bit about digital solutions, to talk about localization and all of that, which are, things that everybody's talking about. And I don't necessarily want us to be shallow about it. I'd like to really understand a bit more deeply, first of all, what it is that CARE is doing with these issues and addressing and confronting these issues, but to set the stage for how we get there, given where the sector is today, given where the development sector is and what's been happening. First of all, can you tell me a little bit about how that has impacted CARE specifically? And then even more specifically, how have these circumstances impacted CARE, Nina? And what are some of the biggest, takeaways from this moment? That's one thing. And then beyond that, we'll kind of, dig in a little bit more deeply to examine how you're addressing these issues.
You talk about the existential crisis for the
Yes.
sector at the moment. Yeah.
Yes.
Obviously, U.S. government, USAID, is the largest donor worldwide. And they're not only them, but even in other industrialized countries, the amount that's being dedicated to aid and to giving from country budgets are shrinking. The biggest, obviously, is the one from USA. So it has a significant impact on our portfolio, but it also has a very significant impact on the saving lives that organizations like CARE are providing. And this is the kind of advocacy that we're currently engaging in. Is yes, we have absorbed the initial shock in a way, but we're trying to show the government and the world the effects of that money disappearing and the good and the positive it used to be doing and the consequences of not having it. At the same time, everybody would have argued for some time now that you need efficiencies in the NGO sector, in the humanitarian sector. Nobody's denying that. So maybe the silver lining, if there's any silver lining to such a big crisis like that, is that maybe we are now looking at how we are structured, how our business model is structured, so that we can actually emerge, we persevere, we need to withstand the initial shock, so to speak, but then persevere and then emerge at the other side with a new business model that will actually, and it lends itself extremely well to the localization, because that's really where a lot of the solution is. So the two themes of today, whether it's the use of technology and digital or the localization, in my own view, are very significant foundational pieces to, if we are to emerge with a new business model for the NGOs, for development, for the humanitarian sector, those are key factors that can actually play into that.
So, yeah, and I think, I mean, I agree with you. And it's interesting. I wouldn't have necessarily, instantly gone to digital technology as a solution, but obviously, having prepared for this conversation, I did my research, but definitely the localization aspect. And so I'm very interested to hear a little bit more from you, particularly around the localization and the digital technologies, of course. But the reason I bring up the localization a bit more acutely is because it's been a term that we've heard in the development sector for years. I mean, I'll tell you, even before I went into philanthropy per se, in this career that I'm in now, when I worked before that in children's educational content development with the Sesame Street, which is what I used to do before I joined Arab Foundations Forum. Um, and the Sesame Street work that I was doing was, very much funded by international development, in many cases by USAID itself. And so this concept of localization was something that I've been hearing. This is now, 25 years ago. In more recent years, the conversation around localization got a little bit controversial. And, I don't know if I was necessarily paying attention to it, from that perspective, looking at it like critically, but started realizing that a lot of people actually thought when you say localization, it's either you're being, trendy, like you're just kind of saying what everybody else is saying, but not really implementing what are sound localization models, or you're being, furthering kind of imperialistic colonialist practice. And so I've always thought of localization as something that's actually really, really good. And maybe that's just a very shallow understanding of it. That's a different issue. But I'm curious to know from your perspective, given the work that you've been doing over the last, 2 decades or so in this sector, what has localization meant to you as Hazem? And then what has it meant for CARE? And how have you implemented it?
Yeah. Well, I think localization, it means a lot of things. It's not a single factor. It's really, you can unpack it and slice it in so many ways. So one of the things, the way I would internalize it myself is that you really value what the local society, what the local organizations bring to the table. And you treat them work with them as valuable partners rather than a subrecipient of a grant, that you partner with them with or without project, with or without money. And it's a mindset of what your values are. And if your values are saying that we are all equal in many ways, small and big, not only as human being, but also small and big as in organizations, and that experiences we bring to the table are all valuable, and we can complement one another, that is the right mindset. To actually manifest it, it will require lots and lots of things. And again, it requires a lot of systems change, like who's actually taking the risk of implementing a project. You get a big money from a big donor, and they want the international NGO to be the contract holder because they can withstand liabilities if anything goes wrong. Then when you do localization, do you pass that on to your local partner? So are you passing on the risk, or are you really, and if you don't, and if you retain a lot of the risk and the liabilities yourself as someone that have the international apparatus of project management perhaps, and the financial capabilities, when you retain that, do you hold with that onto the power, and you only treat your partner at the local level as a subrecipient and a beneficiary, not really as a thought partner and a real contributor to the design and the organization, the creation of what the solution should look like. So that's one way of looking at it. And it really, for me, it's the value that we hold, and how can we appreciate what local partners bring to the table, their intimate knowledge of the local environment, the context, their own experiences of finding solutions that are not necessarily cookie cutter solutions that come from, but at the same time recognizing and not being shy about it, that as an international organization, You have this worldwide view. You have experiences in different contexts. You have experiences in different cultures. And with that comes a lot of richness that you bring to the table as well. You don't impose that on people. So you respect the culture, you respect the context, you respect the originality that comes from the local organization, but at the same time, don't shy away with what you bring to the table as
Right.
sufficient apparatus, as a rich, diverse experiences from worldwide. And if you come at it from that way, and you work with them with that mentality, I think we have a chance of really addressing localization in an appropriate way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I, again, had not thought about it from specifically that risk factor, which is, obviously a very, very important thing to take into account because, and I think that's probably, one of the biggest criticisms of large international agencies and how they function in that space. In the context of localization is that oftentimes they do tend to exploit maybe and I maybe that's not the right word, but take advantage of the privilege of the position of, like you said, their infrastructure, the kind of back end support that an international organization can enjoy, and either attempt or pretend that you're equally sharing the risk with your local partners, which is, very often not the case, or entirely kind of transfer the burden or the onus of responsibility for risk on local partners. And I guess that could explain a little bit of that criticism that I originally started hearing about when people would talk about localization. And so I think, you make a very good point to remind us to kind of take into account, I think, just what it means to acknowledge the privilege of your position and the privilege of the power of the position that international organizations bear when looking at how to implement kind of sound localization models. But I think, and I would be interested in your response on this as well, but we're far from having reached that kind of ideal, right?
Oh, I definitely agree, because a lot of a lot of the donors also speak the language, but when it comes time to actually accepting the risks that may come from that, they don't accept those risks. So they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk, so to speak.
Yeah.
Also, I want to acknowledge something and I'm not necessarily for promoting CARE, but CARE worldwide. If you go into any CARE office in any country, the majority of the people that are operating are from that country. They are aware of the context. They also are part of the international machinery. So there is a little bit of duality here, but they are very local in many ways as well. But to answer your question, no, we are not there. And again, I think it's also based on, if I look at the business model, it's like, how can you actually sustain and be resilient as an organization is also tied to your finances. And so how much of your business are you willing to really delegate to others, and the effect of that in your daily operation and your ability to sustain the resilient big machinery that has a value in its own self. And if you look at only donor money, then that becomes a problem. But if you have your own sources of money where you're able to sustain the machinery without necessarily having to compete on money that can be handed or passed on to local partners, then you have a good balance of how can you do your business. And that's a big struggle. How much of your money come from which donors and which streams of work, and whether they allow you enough flexibility to really live your ambition and realize that vision of yours to become localizing. And it is an intention, it is a mindset, but it's also rooted in the realities of your business and how you're actually working in day to day. And so it's very complex. It's not. Additionally, I think we need to work on the mindset of the people who are in the sector that work in the international organizations. so that we are looking at, because there is a perception that if you are in a local organization, then you know less. And it's again going back to accepting and really valuing what the community brings, what the local organization brings, and partnering with them and accompanying each other into a journey of graduating to being real partners, not just cosmetically pretending to be. But it's a long path. And we're not there yet for sure. I'll give you one more example, if you don't mind.
Please, no, absolutely.
From my immediate experience in Care Egypt, you know, I've been with Care Egypt for some time now, and before I've moved to become the regional director in MENA. One of the things that we have done a few years back, I think we started in 2014, which is to transform Care Egypt itself from a country office that is governed by Care USA to become an independent Egyptian entity. A lot of people accused us at the time of we're only doing this to tap onto new resources, not to truly become an Egyptian organization. But a few years now, we have an Egyptian board. We work with the Egyptian government. Our strategy is completely developed and governed by the priorities of the Egyptian people and the Egyptian government. And we have, I hope, a healthy. I'm no longer part of Care Egypt, by the way. I'm on the board, but I'm not in the executive team. But we have we try to maintain a balanced, healthy relationship between challenging the status quo, but remaining respectful of the local context and what the government and the country needs are. It's a difficult task, but it's always something that everybody who works in development have been living with and able to navigate through.
Right. And so I'm very glad that you brought that up, because obviously that was the first thing that in our prep kind of pre-session I was asking you about. Like, can you explain to me the difference between Care Egypt, which I remember, kind of being established as a separate entity, still part of the confederacy that you were explaining, or the confederation, not the confederacy, obviously, but the confederation, and still kind of, being able to implement its work independently. And so I think that's actually a very interesting example, because in the, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the international development scene, this is kind of a unique example of kind of a huge international organization kind of not splitting off, but incubating an independent country entity. Are there other care offices around the world that function in the same way as Care Egypt?
Oh yeah, the first one that started this was Care in Thailand. That was 20 years ago, and then we had a little bit of a long pause where no one else have done that. Then the next wave was India, Peru. That I remember these two for sure. And then the third wave, which is the wave that Care Egypt became part of, which was Egypt, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Morocco. So we have now truly independent organizations within the Care Confederation that are completely local and locally grounded in terms of where they set their agenda, where they seek their funds, but they're still contributors to the wider Care Confederation, part of its governance, part of influencing its own decisions. Egypt, Morocco are clear examples from our region here.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting, this is definitely an interesting example when you talk about localization and what that really means. Because essentially, ultimately, the aim, from a very idealistic perspective, would ultimately be that that international development organizations would work towards the sustainability that they're working towards building is one that renders them ultimately unnecessary. Right? Like, you want to work yourself out of having to be.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt you, but there is also a lot of criticism. Is like, are you only, this is really Care Morocco or Care Egypt now? Are they truly Egyptian? Are they truly Moroccan? Or are you just switching hat of your governance model? And I believe, but even let me address that. I believe we are. I believe we are, because one of the things that we were talking about, it's like there was a fundamental shift when we became an Egyptian organization, because your accountability becomes to the Egyptian people. Your
Right.
accountability, we have always been accountable to our donors. We have always been accountable to host government, to the government partners that we work with. But to be accountable, not to the beneficiaries, by the way, because we've been also accountable to those. But if you
Right.
are an Egyptian entity and now you're going to do fundraising from the Egyptian public, then you need to answer to them. You need to let them know what you're doing and how you're impacting the lives of the Egyptians in a convincing way, credible way, that they are willing to give you their hard-earned money to be able to
Right.
advance your cause. That's a fundamental shift. However, though,
Oh, absolutely.
even with that, that is not enough. Just transforming few international country offices to become local entities, that does not cut into the localization deep enough. Because in Egypt, for example, because I'm Egyptian, obviously, so I know the context a bit better, there is like 40,000 local NGOs. So the fact that you
Yep.
have one Care Egypt, that of course you can work with many. But if you're looking at a vibrant, healthy Egyptian civil society that is really a partner with the government, a partner with the private sector, and a player in poverty issues in its own country, it takes a whole lot more than just transforming the country office of Plan International, the country office of Care International. So, although it's a good
Absolutely.
step, but certainly not sufficient.
Yeah, and I think, and I appreciate that you can acknowledge that, because it would be very easy to just say, well, done, we've done it, so here we go, and just kind of rest on that laurel. So I appreciate that it's a much more it's a much more complex issue and requires a lot more dedication. So you can't just say I'm a local office. And like you said, in the Egypt context, I mean, I remember hearing the Ministry of Social Solidarity saying that it was even 50,000 NGOs registered in Egypt.
Mhm.
So, between 40 to 50,000, which is a lot. So you are competing on such a level. And like you said, the accountability to the public from whom you are looking to not only uh, give benefit and serve, but also to receive benefit from is kind of that added pressure. And so, which is really kind of a segue, I think, into the next piece of this theme for today, which is around kind of digital technology and the use of digital technology to implement more efficient models. Um, and I would assume that that's one of the ways in which you do that.
Yes.
So I'd be interested to know a little bit more about how you've done that and what has that looked like in this context that you're talking about.
Well, obviously, technology is affecting everything in this world, and it's affecting every industry. So, development and NGO sector is not indifferent to that. You have to, and you can think of it at different levels, or one which is internally how you yourself as an organization work, and can you realize efficiencies as a use of technology? Can you reach more people as a result of use of technology? And the answer to all of this is absolutely yes. One of the things that became very clear out of the COVID era, which is exactly where we are right now. I'm sitting in Amman, you're sitting in the US, we're having a conversation that's witnessed by 30, 40 people from around the region. Having that access to people and working and collaborating with people across the globe, or even sitting in one office in MENA region and then looking at all the other countries, that level of accessibility is a game changer for sure. And you can have more in-depth conversation, you can have more participation in your designing and in evaluating your work that would have never been even imaginable in previous times. You can use that in how you actually collect baseline data before you start your projects, or before you enter into responding to a humanitarian crisis, assessing the needs, collecting data on your mobile or your tablet, where you can actually have real-time live analysis of the collection and the results of it, so that you actually can have decisions that are far more agile because of that, is another aspect that comes with technology. However, though, I think that we're still almost similar to the way we're thinking about the localization. I don't think we're still scratching the surface on all it. Even when we think about AI, artificial intelligence, and what we can do with
Yeah.
it, we're still thinking of technology after the fact. The technology is there, the software is there, and then how can we make use of it? Rather than really partnering with those who are inventing the technology to solve real problems again, at a systems level. And I think that's where the uh, real change, real out of the box may come from. So rather than think of a more efficient data collection way, rather than think of a more better way of cloud-based project management, can actually think of here's the problems, here are the underlying causes of these problems, and you guys have the technology, you know how can we think about it differently. We have the connection with the local community. They have the experience of what that looks like. We have the experiences of around the world. Can we actually create a partnership that thinks differently about the problem? Like, there's a common phrase that says, fall in love with the problem before you actually jump into solutions. How can we actually fall in love with the problem or together in partnership so that we can actually develop technology together rather than just be the recipient of the technology that have already been developed?
Right.
Uh,
And has that been happening? Have you found instances where you've been able to do that?
Not yet. No, no. It's still
Really?
it's still an aspiration of mine, but
Uh,
it's certainly. But we come close to that, where we are not just using existing software to solve an existing problem, but you can actually adapt a technology as a whole for a sect for a for a group of problems. Like, for example, financial inclusion. I think this has been
right.
emerging by governments, by NGO workers, by ITs, because there is also a win-win for everybody. When you digitalize money, when you become a cashless society, the amount of analytics that you're able to find, the amount of targeting that you can actually do with your financial instruments, the amount of real help that you can provide to the farmers to bring resilience to their innovative ideas. How can you connect them to value chains? These are all things that are part of technological solutions. They started elsewhere, but there is an actual need and there is a real win-win in creating partnerships to solve them. So it's not just about receiving a data collection software and taking it to the field guys and let them use it. It's a bit deeper than that. It's not to the level that I was alluding to at the beginning of my discussion. We really get together and solve together, but it's sort of in between.
And what about, I mean, in that, when you come to that point, it begs the question around access. So what do you do about the equity of access
Mhm.
to digital technologies? I mean, again, I remember this takes me back, at one point I was doing a project in Nigeria, Malawi, and Botswana, I think it was. Those were kind of the three different places that we were looking to do mobile tech education for children under the age of 5. And this is like a good 15, 16 years ago. So it's a very different technological landscape. And even then, I remember at the time coming from an organization based in the US that was based in the West, doing work in, Southern Africa, and realizing that actually the access to technology in Southern Africa, I think the proliferation of mobile-based technology in the Nigerian context, if I remember correctly, was 110%,
Mhm.
rather than, whereas as opposed to the US, it was like 60%.
Yeah.
So you actually had more people who were plugged in. And so that was what they were calling at the time, leapfrogging technology, that even, the folks that we were trying to deal with and the kids that we were trying to address in Nigeria actually had more access to mobile technology than kids in the United States, which was an interesting perspective on access and equity to access. But in the case of when you're talking about, if you're looking at empowerment in rural areas, whether it's for gender equity or, for farmers or what do you do about the inequity to access to digital? Like, what happens in that challenge?
I think it's it's asking the right question. And I think just the fact that you're not walking into this blindly and you're realizing that there is inequity in access, that is the very first step. And if you are mindful about that and you assess who has access and who doesn't and why they don't, and the impediment, the challenges that are keeping them from that access, whether it's a particular community because of a lack of infrastructure, and because they don't have a mobile tower near them to allow them to have the signature to the signal, or whether it is the women in the community because of their financial situation economically, whether they're able to buy mobiles or not. And if they are able to buy mobiles, are they smart mobiles or the old ones that just rely on messages and SMS? So I think it's coming in, being mindful to the question and making the initial assessment is a key step. Then next to that, you need to actually work with the community and the stakeholders for them to participate into finding the solutions. And,
Uh-huh.
and if it is about offering subsidized mobile packages, whether it's about buying the line or buying the equipment itself, the phone itself, because ultimately, even as a mobile company, you have an interest to expand your customer base. So if you
Right.
come in and you subsidize the initial onboarding of a community onto your technology, is something that will ultimately reap great benefits to you without being
Sure.
exploited. And that's being the NGOs have to be the honest broker, so that you're not imposing technologies that are not needed by people, and that people are actually getting the opportunity to really get the benefit of that technology and not just being a passive consumer. So
Right.
you know what I'm trying to say here is that
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
you broker relationships that will be beneficial to that private sector or even to the government. If you look at many governments around the world, the way they are working on digitalization of their own government systems and availing networks and signals and internet everywhere and almost everywhere in their country. That comes with a great price, but it comes with a great benefit to the entire country. And I think where NGOs can come in is that this needs to be translating into benefits to the individuals, to the communities as well, and not just stop at the macro level, whether it is for the company or for the country. I think
Right.
we have an obligation to make sure that people realize what they can achieve through technology and how can they become better marketeers or better connecting. Like you can sell potato from one community to the next without having to go through the central broker, the central dealer, for example. So how can you actually make use of that technology to circumvent people who are not really adding to the value chain, so that you translate that into savings that can go into the pockets of the farmers rather into
Right.
big dealers that sits at the city level. So yes, subsidize the technology, invest in the infrastructure, but make sure that as an NGO that's really interested in the well-being of people, that you're working with the local communities and the local NGOs for them to realize what the advantages and the opportunities that they can realize from having technology available to their own hand. I can give you another example that happened from CARE in Egypt and in sub-Saharan Africa. We have the savings group, which is almost the word in Egypt is jam'iyya, where you get together,
Mm-hmm.
you save money together, and every month one of you gets the savings from every month. CARE have developed that model 20 some years ago into something that's far more elaborate, where you're actually almost creating your own local fund between those 20, 25 people, where you have a box where we collect all the money, and then people who want to take loans from that within the group itself to invest into their own micro business can do that. And we have done that year after year. And in 2 or 3 years' times, people do transform into an economic layer, a different economic layer, with 10, 15% increase in their income, very evident impact on individuals and on communities as well. And we took that and we started to digitalize it so that you actually are able to to connect them with banks, connect them with mobile wallets. And we are doing that in Egypt. We've done that with the central bank, and we are doing it in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's creating a real momentum, in particularly in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where these small groups of village savings and loans that we've created have unionized, and they've become NGOs in their own rights, and they are representing their own interest, and they're real players in their own local economy. Talk about localization from the bottom up, not just from the top down. So this is just another example of where the two come together, the digital technology, but
and the local.
Exactly.
Yeah. And how, so from a governance perspective, I'd also be curious, like how that works. On the one hand, so who is ultimately, you're giving local kind of empowerment, but also local responsibility for the management, the disbursement of funds. I mean, how does that work from a trust perspective from the community?
Sure. It's a very small group, so it's really a completely decentralized group of 20 people. So they agree to how they want to manage their own relationship, how they want to manage their own funds. And we have a bit of a template of, well, these are the things you need to consider if you want to prioritize who gets the loan. Let's say that we have £5,000 in the box, and we get requests for loans of 10,000. How you prioritize these requests without accounting for favoritisms or power holding or whatever. So we create a criteria upfront before they even start to save the money. So it's completely self-run group, but we give to them the different questions, the different tools, the different mentality, and they run with it. And we do it with them, and we hold their hand for like a year or two, but then they continue on their own, and sometimes they grow, and they take the idea, similar to the idea of the Jama'iyya. It's like nobody's managing of course. So, but when they started to sort of get together and create something that's far more than just an individual group, that's when you start to work with the local laws and how can they be governed. But again, the money remains at only the small nodes. So there's risk at the central level, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, this concept of like these pooled funds and how these pooled funds can be a bit more formalized is very interesting, and it also would, call into question some of the safeguarding against exploitation, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things that I always think about in terms of, the minute you said you take it out of that very small group and then you start connecting to the banks, how then do we ensure that the banks are not being exploitative of these small groups, whether it's in interests or in managing their money, et cetera? But I mean, so many of the things that you just talked about, and it segues into some of the questions that we have. We have 2 questions already, 3 questions. And we're about 10 minutes to the hour. Every time these conversations go on, I just feel like, how do we get all of this crammed into 1 hour? It's not fair. We always need more time. I just think it's so fascinating. But you brought you brought up several different things. One is around the issue of sustainability, right? So the sustainability of programs from the development sector to kind of local communities. How do you then, if you're subsidizing certain models, if you're subsidizing certain technologies, how do you do it in a way where it's not these one-off pilot programs and then you're walking away and, this community's left with iPads that no one's ever going to use again, or isn't able to charge, or it's too expensive, to top up the data or whatever it is. So that's, I think, one interesting way of looking at when you're designing these models, when you're looking at a localization model, how do you design it with conscience, right? So that's one thing. But it brings me to a question about the digital aspect of this, which we have in the Q&A here from Shahla, who's saying, she's someone who works in. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm not even sure if this is she or he, but I apologize. So someone working in the NGO sector with a focus on sustainable development goals, including water resource management, I've been increasingly concerned about the environmental footprint of emerging technologies. while AI offers many opportunities for improving NGO work, I read about the significant water consumption, so that goes to your expertise as well, significant water consumption involved in training and running AI models, especially across data centers. So given our commitment to protecting water resources, how do we reconcile the adoption of AI and that kind of digital innovation in our sector with the urgent need to conserve water from a climate perspective and a conservation perspective? Are there more sustainable approaches or solutions that are being developed to address this issue, or is that as critical of a question?
I think where we get the idea of energy consumption and efficient use of training AI models or even on crypto, that's where a lot of the criticism come from very often on blockchain and crypto mining and stuff like that. I will not deny that these things are really energy hungry. However, though, the opportunities they bring about, particularly artificial intelligence, in finding solutions that will, going back to your expression, leapfrog, that will just let us revolutionize some of the scientific research and finding new medicine or finding. So it's a much bigger question than my little brain to be able to answer. But my own gut feeling is that there is a good balance there, honestly. Particularly because those tools, if applied with dignity, if applied in a way that's not exploitative, if applied in a transparent way, they do democratize development. They do democratize empowerment, economic growth, and they do fight corruption. And the benefits that come from that, I would say, plus the scientific research that will probably overcome the energy consumption, probably sooner rather than later. To me, on the balance, that is not a bad thing.
Right.
So I'm not necessarily personally worried about the energy consumption regarding to what AI is providing, because we do a lot of energy consumption in wars, which
For sure.
we do not provide the potential solutions, the potential transformation of world wicked problems as something like these new technologies are providing. With a caveat is that we have to have enough worldwide watchdog organizations that will hold these big IT power companies to check and to make sure that, like the way we train the artificial intelligence data sets, they do account for the different culture, the different context, so that there is no inherent bias in image recognition that are only looking at those who live in England or those who live in Nashville or whatever, to be the way we identify what the person looks like, and the account for the experiences and the livelihoods of other people. Not just about images, obviously. Images is the easy one. Of course. But the inherent bias that you can find in artificial intelligence training sets, data sets, is a big thing. Or the concentration of power in the hands of those big companies to the detriment of the development and the equity that we all want to see in the world. So we need to be advocating and promoting more and more open source companies that promote open source solutions, so that they're not monetizing the technology or only monetizing the technology, that there's also a lot of it that's available for the good of that world. So there are lots of ways to actually combat against the bad, but not necessarily to shy away completely from the technology and say, well, it's not good, let's not do it, because I think we'll be left in the analog world 50 years ago if we never engage with those.
Right. Yeah, and I think, I mean, again, like you're bringing up it, whether intentionally or not, but the role that the development sector itself plays in brokering some of these, mitigating issues and kind of like navigating what is a sector in and of itself, like, the digital kind of AI tech sector alone, but then how do you use that to the advantage of the development sector, to the advantage of the world, to the advantage of humanity, from an idealistic perspective, but still, still take into account some of the challenges that may come from it. There's a couple of questions that are also open here, and I think I'm going to try to, because we have about 3-4 minutes left, and I want to be able to end on a really kind of, it's not necessarily a forced positive note, but to be able to end on like productive insights and productive tips on how people can kind of navigate all of these various challenges with a little bit of support. But one of the things which comes up a lot in some of these questions is around, again, it touches on the localization issue. It touches on, giving agency to local communities, giving agency and empowering local communities, not only in assessing who bears the risk versus who doesn't, but then also assessing how much weight to give local communities in designing their own priorities and looking at how to fund their own priorities. But then also, so I'm combining several different questions here, but also, one person is talking about how do you bring about equity in providing access to marginalized communities as well. So, one thing is allowing agency for local communities to design their own priorities, but then also, how do you ensure that marginalized communities are being given the same access, whether it's communities that face disability or extreme poverty that may not have the same access as everybody else within a local context? How has CARE looked at that, or what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's how we, again, if I'll go back to when you asked me about localization, and I said that it's really about the values you hold. And if you walk into a community and start to work with a community, and you hold that value dear to you, that you really appreciate what they bring, and you're not here to impose any particular solution, immediately you will be listening to what they have to bring. You will be capitalizing on their own solutions and making sure that these solutions have a venue to be applied, rather than imposing a particular solution on them. And you will also have to be, and you mentioned that earlier, have to be the honest broker between them and whoever is going to be bringing in the money or bringing in the technology. And if you have that, it does not guarantee that you will get good results. It does not necessarily guarantee that you will solve the entire problem, but certainly you will be 1 or 2 steps towards that. So creating local solutions and innovation, and local innovation is not waiting for anybody, by the way. When people find opportunities that would make sense to them, that will advance the problems or advance the solutions to the problem they have, particularly if it can stand on its own feet economically, they will run with it. So if you just open that and you facilitate the discussion so that they themselves discover the solution that they want to apply, the momentum of the solution itself will carry itself forward, and you will not have to continually hold their hand. The examples of the projects that come up from the Village Savings and Loans the thing that the savings group, the number of projects that come up and the innovations that come from these projects, and how diverse they are and how they sustain and grow, where people start with a 500 loan to buy 2 or 3 ducks, to actually have a small farm where they employ 20, 30 women that help them. So things do grow on its own, particularly if you come in with the mindset, if you are the honest broker, and then allow people to see the value in their own creation.
Right. So I'm going to ask you one kind of last question here from the Q&A about, so Rada's asking about some of the strategies that CARE has adopted to adjust to these massive shifts that we were talking about in the funding landscape, what we're talking about at the very big opening of this episode. And which ones do you think appear to be kind of the most promising, that can help sustain and scale or grow impact in this context that we're facing?
It's interesting enough, because I've just finished a meeting where we were talking about our next 5-year strategy.
Uh,
and what is emerging from it. And we started that conversation a few months ago, but we had to go on a pause because of the recent USAID thing. And now we're resuming that discussion. And it's interesting enough that what's coming back, what we were talking about a few months ago, is still very valid. And
sure.
it's really about being much leaner organization, much more optimal in terms of your own cost structure, utilizing digital, localizing, and engaging with the private sector. So a lot of the things that we have talked about today hold the key to the solutions of what the crisis is right now. And like we
Mm,
started the conversation, and if you want to end up on a positive note, but it's not forced by any means, we really have to persevere. We have to sustain that shock that we have got in the last few months, and we will emerge with a new business model as an industry, because the world needs care and the organizations like care. People, the world needs local organizations. And if we are able to unpack what that looks like with a new business model for the industry, it will be better for the whole world. I'll probably end here.
I love that. That's a great way to end. I think my biggest kind of concern and hope, um, if I can put those two things together, is to say that, yes, I agree. I think that there's an incredible opportunity for a new model to emerge. I just hope that and when I talk to people like you and really almost everyone that we kind of engage with around these conversations, whether it's in person or like this on a public platform, I do have hope that the new model that will emerge will be one that is more equitable, that is more just. I don't want us to be replacing something old with a similar version of the old that just looks new, right? And I think it's that kind of conscientiousness around, conscience-based thinking.
Mhm,
I don't know if
mhm.
that's even a thing, but you know what I mean? Like just
Yeah, yeah.
thinking about these issues from a and so you mentioned several times, honest broker, ethics, looking at respect, respecting context, respecting people, respecting communities. Um, and I think at the end of the day, that really is where all that stems from, right? That those sort of sustainable solutions stem from that. So I'll give you the
And
last word, Hazem.
just to build on what you've just said, I think if you are genuine about holding these values, that in itself, because if without being authentic about these values, that new business model will never emerge. It is baked into that new model that you have to be authentic, you have to be respectful of the local community. Otherwise, it will never take off. So maybe that
Yeah.
is the guarantee. Let's hope. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fantastic.
Mm.
Um, Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was
Thank you.
really so insightful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll follow up with everyone. Thanks everyone for joining us. Um, this, like as always, our webinars go on our website about a couple of days after we're done. You'll get the recording link, share it with your friends. Reach out to us for any questions. If you have any follow-up questions to anything that we discussed today, please let us know. And thank you so much for everyone for joining us. And thanks to the AFF team and Hazem. All the best. It was
Thank
really
you.
lovely. Thank you
Really.
so much. And we'll
Thank you.
talk soon. And